They tied Willa by the wrists and hoisted her up in front of the chapel, where even the children had been told to watch. No trial, no preacher's prayer, just the wooden beam between her arms and the thick rope biting into her skin. The sheriff stood with his arms crossed, silent, while the townsfolk muttered about her betrayal. "She laid with one of them," an old woman hissed. "Let her swing." Willa didn't scream. Her mouth was swollen shut. Her eyes searched the horizon, not for mercy, but for the man they said she had loved. He hadn't been seen since the raid. They said he was Apache, like that explained everything. But Willa remembered the night he found her behind the barn, barefoot, shivering, her stepbrother's belt still fresh across her legs. He hadn't spoken a word, just handed her water, and waited until she could walk again. They met in secret after that, not out of shame but protection. He told her his name, Tahu, and it meant silence in his tongue. "Because I listen before I act," he said once. He never took anything from her, not her body, not her tears, only gave. One night she brought him bread, and he offered her a carved bone ring. She never wore it publicly, but that didn't matter when her stepbrother found it tucked beneath her mattress. Now she hung in her torn dress, lips cracked, blood on her chest, while the town that never protected her spit out words like whore and traitor. Sheriff Weller gave the nod. The rope was tight. Willa's knees buckled. "Wait!" someone shouted. Hooves thundered behind the crowd. Gasps rose like smoke. She blinked, thinking she imagined it. But no. A rider in bone-painted buckskin charged through the line, unarmed, face streaked with paint and fury. Before anyone could cock a rifle, he slid off his horse, reached into his sash, and pulled out something strange, a long branch wound in white cloth, the end burning with sage. "This is not your justice," he said, voice low but ringing. "This is your sickness." Townsfolk froze. Sheriff reached for his gun, but the horse reared, as if guarding the Apache's back. Willa's breath hitched. Tahu stepped forward, raised the burning branch, and touched it gently to the knot above her head. The rope singed instead of snapping, curling away from the flame as if ashamed. Willa dropped like a sack of grain, but Tahu caught her before she hit the ground. One arm beneath her legs, one around her back, he stood tall before the people who'd branded her a traitor. Willa gasped as breath surged back into her chest. She didn't speak. Her face was half covered in blood and dust, but her eyes were wide and alive. Murmurs rippled through the square. "He's got magic," someone whispered. "That's not medicine, it's witchcraft." Sheriff Weller raised his revolver. "Put her down," he barked, "or you die where you stand." But Tahu didn't flinch. He turned slowly, cradling Willa like something sacred, and addressed the sheriff in English so calm it felt like thunder. "She is not your prisoner. She is not your shame. She is mine now." Willa stirred, moaned something weak. Tahu knelt and laid her gently on the ground, then pressed his fingers to her temples, to her collarbone, to the bruise on her cheek. He wasn't performing. There was no show, just deep focus, like he was drawing something dark from under her skin. The town stood silent. A few women cried without knowing why. Then Tahu stood again and looked straight at the sheriff. "I did not come for war," he said, "but if you raise that weapon, I will end it." His words didn't match the trembling in Weller's hands. For a long breath, no one moved. Then a girl, little Maribel, the blacksmith's daughter, stepped forward. She held a scrap of blue cloth in her hand. "Miss Willa gave me this," she said, voice shaking. "When my ma passed, she said it was for courage." Her father yanked her back, but the girl had already changed something. A crack in the hate, a doubt in the surety. Tahu knelt again beside Willa and reached into his satchel. From it he drew a stone, a small wooden bowl, and a vial of oil that shimmered strangely in the sun. "I will not take her," he said, "but I will leave her whole." He lit a fire right there in the dust of the town square. No one dared stop him. Willa's chest rose and fell. She blinked up at him, and this time her lips moved clearly. "You came." And Tahu, without smiling, replied, "You called." The fire crackled low between them, casting flickers of gold on Willa's bruised skin. Tahu crushed dried petals into the flame, whispering words in Apache too soft for the townsfolk to understand. But Willa understood. Not the language, but the meaning. Like something inside her had been waiting to hear it. Her fingers twitched, her lips parted again. "They said you left." Tahu didn't answer right away. He looked toward the crowd, where shame now hung heavier than accusation. Then back to her. "I was taken," he said. "When they caught me at the trading post, they thought I was stealing. Sheriff Weller sold me south. I fought my way free." Willa tried to sit up, wincing. "They told me you ran, that you lied." Her voice cracked. "I believed them. I hated you." Tahu dipped the cloth into the warm oil and touched it to her shoulder. She winced, then sighed. "I never lied," he said quietly. "They beat me, chained me, but I never gave them your name." Willa looked away. "I told them everything." She closed her eyes. "I was so scared, so angry at you." "You had reason," he said, "but I still came." She opened her eyes slowly, searching his face for the boy she once kissed under the cottonwood tree by the river. He was there, but changed. Leaner, harder, older in the eyes, but her Tahu still. Her mouth trembled. "Why here? Why now?" "Because last night," he said, "I dreamed of your voice. And when I woke, my brother's hawk was perched on the rail. That's not a sign I ignore." Behind them, someone muttered, "Witch." Another whispered, "Savage." But no one moved. Willa reached for his hand. "They'll come for us," she said. "Let them," he replied. "But we won't be here." He turned to the crowd. "You may watch, you may hate, but today you will not harm her again." And with that he stood, lifting Willa once more, slow and careful, like she was made of something more than flesh. The crowd parted. Not willingly, not honorably, but out of fear. Not of Tahu's strength, but of what he made them feel. Doubt. Regret. Willa wept into his neck, half from pain, half from something breaking open inside her. The tree she'd hung from still swayed, empty now, and where the rope had burned through, the wind tugged gently at the scorched end, like even it wanted to let her go. They rode east through the dry wash, the town shrinking behind them like a lie exposed to sunlight. Willa clung to Tahu's back, her arms weak but sure. Every bump of the horse reminded her of her wounds, but she didn't ask him to stop. She didn't want to be anywhere else. Tahu guided the mare with silence, but his grip never wavered. He knew they were being watched. He could feel the eyes on them from behind rocks, above in the buttes. But no one moved. No one interfered. The land recognized him. When they reached the narrow canyon where the cottonwoods grew dense and the water trickled even in summer, he slid down first and lifted her gently. Willa looked around. "I know this place," she whispered. "You should," he said, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "This is where we said we'd run." She let out a breath between a sob and a laugh. "We were 15. And honest?" he replied. He carried her to the flat rock beneath the trees, the same one where he once carved her initials beside his. They were still there, faded, but etched deep. "I thought you were dead," she said as he unwrapped her wounds. "Or married. Or gone in the way the world makes men disappear." Tahu crushed something green between his fingers and pressed it to her ribs. "They tried," he said simply, "but the fire stayed." Willas stared at him. "Why did you come back, after all this?" His hand slowed. "Because I remembered your voice before you were afraid. The way you said my name without shame. That's not something you forget." Her throat closed. She wanted to say something, anything, but all she managed was his name. "Tahu," he looked up. "They'll chase us." "I know. They'll call it theft again, treason, sin." He nodded. "Let them. Let them call it what they like. But you and I know what it is." He took her hand and pressed it to his chest. "You live here now." The words hit like thunder, quiet, final, real. Willa closed her eyes and leaned into him, not because she was weak, but because she finally could. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The stream whispered nearby, the leaves shifting like an old woman's lullaby. Tahu began to hum a tune she hadn't heard since they were young, an Apache melody that once made her dance barefoot in the dark. She smiled. For the first time in years, she smiled. Tahu left before sunrise. Willa woke to the emptiness beside her, the warmth of where he'd lain already fading. For a moment, panic surged. Had he truly returned? Or had her mind conjured a final kindness before death? But then she saw the bundle of soaked yucca leaves he'd left, the folded deerskin cloak over her legs, and the freshly dug fire pit nearby. No dream would bother with such care. He'd gone to find food, she told herself. He'd be back. Hours passed. The canyon held her like a secret, but her thoughts raced back to the town, to the rope, to her father's cold eyes watching her feet dangle. For loving a savage, they had said. But in that moment, the crowd hadn't looked angry. They had looked afraid, afraid of love stronger than their hatred, afraid of a girl who chose it. She traced her fingers along the old carving in the rock. C+T, barely visible beneath moss and time. A soft noise made her turn. Tahu stood at the edge of the clearing, a rabbit strung over his shoulder, a look on his face she couldn't read. "They came to the ridge," he said. "2 men, one had a rifle. I watched them turn back." Willa's breath caught. "Will they come again?" "Maybe. Maybe not." He knelt beside her and began cleaning the rabbit, his hands steady. "They saw my mark on a tree. They know I'm not hiding." "What if they bring more?" she whispered. "What if they come to burn us out?" Tahu looked at her, then back to the knife in his hand. "Let them try. I've buried brothers for less." She stared at him, not with fear, but awe. He wasn't the boy she used to sneak kisses with behind the blacksmith's barn. He was something older now, fire wrapped in bone. "Tahu, why did they say you were dead?" she asked. He paused. "Because I was meant to be. Your father told them he shot me in the hills, and they believed him. Easier than believing his daughter would choose me." Her heart twisted. Shh. He placed a hand gently on her knee. "I don't need revenge, Willa. I need only to stay alive. With you." The words sank in. Not dramatic, not loud, just true. He handed her a piece of firewood. "Will you build it, or do I have to sing until you remember how?" Willa grinned through tears and reached for the flint. "Sing anyway. It helps the sparks know we're still here." By nightfall, the fire crackled between them, casting gold across Willa's cheeks and dancing in Tahu's eyes. He sat cross-legged, braiding strips of rabbit hide for snares, while she folded the cloak he'd lent her, tracing the stitching like it was scripture. "This place," she murmured. "You used to bring me here when we were children. We thought it was magic." Tahu nodded. "Still is. Magic's just survival you believe in." His voice was quiet, but it filled the space between them like a shield. Willa looked down at the bruises on her wrists, at the rawness near her collarbone where the rope had burned her skin. "They think I'm dead," she said. "Let them," he answered. "Dead girls don't have to beg for their names back." She smiled faintly, then grew serious. "Do you ever wish you'd stayed away? Left me to whatever they were going to do?" Tahu didn't answer at first. The fire popped between them, and an owl called from the trees above. Then he said, "I went back once, just to see the church from the ridge. I saw them tying the sign around your neck." His jaw clenched. "That sign wasn't for you. It was for anyone watching. A warning." Willas swallowed. "What did it say?" He met her eyes. "For loving a savage." She closed her eyes, but not in shame. In grief, not for herself, but for them, for what they had to believe in order to sleep at night. Tahu stood and walked over to the edge of the clearing, where the moonlight fell in broken shards through the trees. "I carved something for you," he said, "while you were still unconscious." She followed him slowly, her legs still unsteady. Beneath the roots of an old pine, he knelt and pulled back the earth to reveal a flat stone, etched deep with Lakota symbols. She couldn't read them, but she could feel them. "What does it say?" she asked. He looked up at her. "It's your name, in my people's tongue. It means voice that carried." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because even half dead, in the snow, you whispered my name, and it carried me back to life." Willa dropped to her knees beside the stone, fingers trembling as she traced each symbol. For once, she didn't cry, didn't tremble, didn't need to be held. She simply sat beside the man she had once chosen in secret, now chosen again. Louder, bolder, in defiance of the world that tried to silence her. She whispered, "Then let this be my grave and my beginning." And Tahu whispered back, "So long as I live, your name will never be buried." They traveled by moonlight now, never staying in one place more than a night. Tahu said the town might send someone after her, not because they missed her, but because they feared what her survival would mean. Willa, still limping slightly, never complained. She had stopped asking what came next. Her world had narrowed to the sound of Tahu's footsteps and the steady rhythm of his breath when he slept beside her. One morning, as they approached a creek swollen from snowmelt, Willa paused. "I keep waiting to feel angry," she said, "at my father, the preacher, the women who watched and didn't stop it." Tahu dipped his hands in the water, then looked at her with a stillness that was somehow stronger than fury. "Anger doesn't feed you, doesn't warm your skin or build a cabin." Willa crouched beside him. "Then what does?" He reached into his satchel and took out a small pouch. From it, he poured crushed sage into her palm. "This," he said. "Medicine. Memory. Something that turns wounds into maps." She stared at the bitter-smelling herbs. "You think they'll become part of me?" He smiled gently. "They already are." Later that day, they reached the remains of an old Lakota homestead, half burned, half swallowed by vines. Tahu moved like he knew every stone. "This was my grandmother's," he said, "before the raids." Willa touched the edge of a charred door frame. "You want to live here?" "I want to rebuild it," he said, "not to forget." To honor Willa walked the perimeter, her fingers brushing what had once been a fence. "What would I be here?" she asked softly. "You wouldn't be anything but yourself," he answered. "But if you stayed, the land would know your voice. And that's a kind of belonging most folks never get." She looked at him then, not with fear, not with longing, but with clarity. Then teach me, she said. Not just how to survive. Teach me how to begin again. He took her hand, placed it against the earth. The beginning starts when you stop hiding your pain. That night, she laid a blanket beneath a willow tree and told Tahu everything. About her mother's silence, her father's rage, the letters she used to write but never send. He listened, never interrupting. When she finally finished, he placed a carved bone bead into her palm. My people give these when someone tells the truth that once hurt too much to speak. Willa turned the bead over, its grooves catching moonlight. And what am I supposed to do with it? Wear it, he said, so you remember you lived through it, and that makes you unbreakable. The next morning, Willa woke before the sun and stepped barefoot into the dew-covered grass, feeling for the first time like she was somewhere she wasn't meant to leave. Tahu was already up, carving something small from wood, his eyes tracking her without judgment. Sleep, he asked. She nodded, then paused. Do you think they'll ever stop calling me that? Calling you what? He asked. The woman who betrayed her people, the one who laid with a savage. Tahu didn't flinch. Instead, he placed the half-finished carving in her hand. It was a tiny bird, wings outstretched. This is not what they'll remember, he said. You think towns remember anything other than what confirms their shame? She asked, anger flickering beneath her ribs. They remember what gets retold, he said, so tell it different. That day, Willa began to write. Not letters, not journal entries. Stories. Stories about the preacher's false mercy, about the women's silence, about the noose and the bruise and the man who touched her shoulder like it was sacred. She wrote while Tahu hunted, and while he taught her to tie knots and stack wood, and listen to the wind. He never read over her shoulder, never asked. But at night, he would sit beside her as she folded each finished page and tucked it into a tin box by the fire. When the time comes, he said, burn them. Or read them aloud. But don't let them rot in silence. One evening they heard a rider approaching. Tahu stood first, his body suddenly a wall between her and the unknown. The man was alone, cloaked, his hat low. You Tahu? He asked. Depends, Tahu replied. Who's asking? The man lifted his head, revealing a Lakota tattoo across his cheek. My sister said you might be out here. Said you were carrying broken things. Willa stepped forward before she could second-guess herself. Is that what I am? She asked. The man studied her. Maybe, but even broken bones grow stronger when they heal. He tossed a small pouch to Tahu and turned his horse. You'll need that for the winter. Then he was gone. Tahu opened the pouch. Seeds, corn, wild medicine. A gift. Willa stared at them. So we're really doing this? He took her hand. Only if you say yes. She didn't hesitate. Yes. That night she burned her first page, not out of shame, but as a signal. Smoke rose into the stars, carrying her truth with it. Not as a whisper. As a vow. When the first frost kissed the ground, Willa and Tahu had already cleared a patch of land near the ridge, where wildflowers had once covered the valley in defiant color. They built slowly, logs hauled by hand, mud plastered into the cracks, a roof made from cedar and bark. Every nail felt like a word unsaid, every beam a story rewritten. Willa no longer flinched when she saw her reflection in the stream. The scar on her neck, left by the rope that had nearly ended her, no longer seemed ugly. It looked like proof. One morning, as she knelt to press seeds into the dark soil, she paused. What if nothing grows? She asked. Tahu crouched beside her, placing his hand over hers. Then we try again, or we find something that does. That winter, they survived on dried meat, roots, and the strange kindness of neighbors who didn't ask questions, but sometimes left food at the edge of the trees. Willa never asked who they were. She only left a thank you carved into bark. Slowly, the quiet around them grew warm instead of heavy. And one night, while snow fell soft as breath outside, Tahu placed a carved bird, the twin of the one he'd once given her, into her hand. "It's time," he said. She looked up. "For what?" "To name it," he replied. "All stories deserve names." Willa held the bird for a long moment before whispering, "This one's called The Woman Who Was Hung for Love." Tahu smiled, and for the first time, she didn't flinch at the word. Love, it no longer felt dangerous, it felt deserved. Spring came like a promise. The soil broke open with green. One morning, Willa stepped outside and found a girl standing near the edge of the field, barefoot and staring. She looked maybe 12, her dress torn, her face drawn with hunger. Willa didn't speak. She simply extended her hand. The girl hesitated, then walked forward. "Are you the witch?" she asked. Willa blinked. "What?" "They said a white woman lived with a savage and grew ghost seeds." Willa laughed, really laughed, for the first time in a long time. "I suppose I am." The girl's lips trembled. "I'm hungry." Willa nodded. "Then come eat." And as they walked toward the small cabin, the girl asked, "What's your name?" Willa paused. "Once, I was the woman they hung. But now I'm the one who writes how the story ends." The girl looked confused, but Willa only smiled. Tahu was waiting at the door, arms crossed, eyes knowing, and behind them the wind picked up the scent of soil and cedar and firewood. Not of ashes, but of beginnings. By summer, Willa no longer looked over her shoulder when the wind shifted. Her life, once defined by silence and shame, had turned into something soft but solid. Word of the woman who'd lived through the hanging had spread in whispers, some calling her a witch, others a miracle, but none dared speak her name aloud. It suited her fine. She had no need for their understanding anymore. One afternoon, she found the girl, who still hadn't shared her name, attempting to mimic Tahu's arrow carving, her fingers trembling with focus. Willa sat beside her and offered a smoother stone. "You'll learn faster if you stop trying to impress anyone," she said gently. The girl didn't look up, only asked, "Did it hurt?" Willa nodded. "Yes, all of it. But not as much as being invisible." That evening, when the sun dipped behind the ridge and shadows fell across the planted rows, Willa stepped into the cabin and found something waiting on the table. A letter. No return mark, just folded parchment. Inside was a single sentence. She should have died. The town mourned when she didn't. There was no signature, but Willa knew the hand. Pastor Elgin. She didn't cry. She didn't tell Tahu. She simply took the letter outside, set it on a flat stone, and burned it slowly with a twig from the very tree they'd once tried to hang her from. As the smoke rose, she whispered, "You don't own my ending." 1 week later, the girl, now stronger, fuller in the face, humming when she worked, finally said her name. Lissa. She said it in the middle of washing potatoes, as if it meant nothing. But Willa knew it meant everything. Names were stories. Names were stakes in the world. On the first day of the new harvest, they invited a quiet family from the North Ridge to share stew and bread. Tahu placed an extra log on the fire, and Lissa braided Willa's hair with wildflower stems. When one of the guests asked who she was, Willa answered, "The woman they tried to erase." And the guest, a mother of 5 with tired eyes, simply nodded. "Then you're the kind we build new towns from." Later that night, after laughter had softened the walls and the candles burned low, Tahu pressed his forehead to Willa's and said, You saved more than yourself." She didn't answer right away. She simply listened to the wind not carrying her name in warning, but in warmth. She had not only survived the rope, she had taught others how to loosen theirs. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen her there, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.